Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the National Association of Marine Labs educational webinar series. My name is Chung Chung, and I serve as the chair of the NAML Education Committee with several education committee members representing WAML, the Western Association of Marine Labs, SAML, the Southern Association, and NAMGL, which is the Northeastern Association of Marine and Great Lakes Laboratories, along with our vice chair, Melinda Simmons from Cal State University, Monterey Bay. It's always an honor to be able to host this education webinar. Thank you for joining us here today. Today, we're going to hear about teaching culture through coastal waters, tides of knowledge. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. Jessica Berry. Dr. Berry is a speech language pathologist, researcher, and educator whose work sits at the intersection of language, culture, and education. Her expertise spans dialect awareness, language acquisition, and sociolinguistics, with a particular focus on the Gullah Geechee language and its deep cultural and historical significance along the southeastern U.S. coast. For those of us in the marine and coastal sciences, her work offers an important and often underrepresented perspective. The Gullah Geechee community is rooted in coastal landscapes, and their language, traditions, and ways of knowing are inseparable from those environments. Dr. Berry helps us understand how culture and place are intertwined and why that matters for how we teach, engage, and build relationships with coastal communities. Now, on a personal note, as a first generation Asian American, I've experienced how language differences are often perceived and sometimes misunderstood in academic spaces. That experience is why I'm really excited to learn about Dr. Berry's work, which challenges us to rethink those assumptions and recognize the strengths and identities embedded in the ways people speak. Beyond her research and teaching, Dr. Berry is deeply committed to creating equitable educational spaces. She is founder of the Okra Soup Foundation, which empowers the Gullah Geechee youth through programs like Webinya, Geechee Girls Rock, and she brings that same commitment to her work in higher education and professional development. She pushes us to think critically about how language differences shape student experiences and how we can better support learners who speak non-mainstream varieties of English. So, for the National Association of Marine Labs community, her work is especially relevant as we think about place-based education, community partnerships, and inclusive excellence in coastal and marine science. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jessica Berry. Dr. Berry, you have the virtual floor.
Good afternoon, and thank you all so much for having me. It is an absolute pleasure to be here to share with you, as he described, my passion for Gullah Geechee culture. So today we're going to explore how to teach culture through coastal waters, specifically related to my beloved Gullah Geechee heritage. I want to look at it from a lens of literacy and cultural competency. So our roadmap for the time that I am with you is to start with understanding why water matters in culture. Move through the history of the Gullah Geechee people, our traditions, and then pivot to some practical strategies for classrooms and adapting hands-on activities. This, I hope, will be somewhat interactive as much as we can. So I want you to type in the chat the questions that you have. I'll have some intentional pauses and spaces to answer some of your questions, and also opportunities for us to reflect and engage. Before we dive deep, I want to open the way our Gullah Geechee ancestors did with a ritual of welcome. I was in kindergarten at Jenny Moore Elementary in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, and a beautiful woman walked into the classroom and she said, Fanga alafia, ashe, ashe. Fanga alafia, ashe, ashe. Akiwa alea, ashe, ashe. Akiwa alea. Ashe, ashe. And I remember being in that classroom, one of only three other brown girls, and hearing her sing those words. I never forgot that song. And as I continued in my work studying Gullah Geechee culture and its connections to the African coast, I learned that it is a Swahili song that means welcome. I welcome you with my thoughts, my words, and my open heart. So, by gathering here, we are honoring the traditions of the Low Country. We're acknowledging the intelligence and the resilience embedded in these practices. This is a space for recognition and deep respect. So I invite you to kind of open up your chat right now, if you can, the Q&A, and type, how are you showing up today? I know it's a Friday. It's kind of the end of the week, going into the weekend. So how are you showing up today on this webinar? Are you curious? Are you eager to learn? Are you tired? Are you excited? Give me one word and how you're showing up today. I'll give you just a second to do that.
Seems like the word might be shy to start with today.
Shy. We're showing up shy. Eager to learn. I have been looking forward to this. Thank you, Melinda. Feeling great. All right, Scott. I like that. That's exciting. So we got people who are stoked to get in touch with the coastal culture. Welcome, Matthew, and thank you for engaging. Missing my colleagues at Skidaway in Savannah. Absolutely, Savannah's gorgeous. Actually named my daughter Savannah because I love Savannah so much. So thank you guys for answering that question and for just opening up the space. I feel excited and eager to share what I know about my culture. So, water as connection. I want you to just take one moment and think about one body of water that is meaningful to you. It could be an ocean, a river, a lake, somewhere that has marked your life. And I want you to just reflect really quick on that body of water. And once you've thought about that body of water that is important to you, again, we're going back to the Q&A. And I want you to type in one word that describes that body of water for you. Don't need a full sentence, but just one word that describes your body of water that is meaningful to you. Mystery, peaceful. Thanks, Constance and Matthew. That's great. Peaceful. I love peaceful. Ancestral. Yes. Yes. So good. Heartbreaking. Yeah. Rejuvenating. Mhm. Water is powerful, and waterways they matter, and they are woven into the identity of Gullah Geechee people. But they're also central to all culture. Water carries memory, its survival, its spirituality, and its home. So when students see water through cultural lens, they're not just learning biology or history, they're learning about identity, resilience, and belonging that's transformative in their teaching. When we were growing up, water was all around us. I lived in a small town called Geechee, South Carolina, which is right in the middle of the Francis Marion National Forest and in the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor. But if I went to the right, I went to Quimby Creek. And if I went to the left, was French Quarter Creek. And in order to get to Charleston and Mount Pleasant, I had to cross over the Wando River and some other bodies of water. In Mount Pleasant, which is where my grandparents lived and I grew up, there was Isle Palm and Sullivan Island beaches there. And so water for me was always present. And as an adult, my experience with water has been peaceful. It's a peaceful place for me to go. I didn't always see it that way. We were almost afraid of the water and what it could do. And you have to have a certain level of respect for it. But water is central, particularly to Gullah Geechee people. We're going to dive in to why that is. So we're going to start here on the journey. The transatlantic slave trade constituted one of the worst crimes against humanity recorded in history. So, of course, over 4 centuries, a cruel and thriving economy developed around enslaving and transporting millions of African people across the Atlantic Ocean, known as the Middle Passage. They were kidnapped. Water, in this particular context, is not just a place or a thing, it's a witness to trauma and it's a carrier of ancestral memory. When Gullah Geechee people encounter water today, there is sacred but a really complex relationship there. Because for us, water reflects survival, pain, and pride all intertwined. We see the water, we see all of these things. How could something so peaceful and so beautiful and so calming also be sacred, be a place of pain, but also pride, because Gullah Geechee people are proud of the African ancestry in which they hold. So between the early 1500s and 1860s, the slave traders forced some 12.5 million men and women and children aboard transatlantic slave ships on African shores. And this number does not include the millions more who died during the journey from the interior to the coast or who perished before the ships arrived to even carry them away. A lot of them were transported to the colonies in the Caribbean, including 1.2 million to Jamaica, and then others, about 4.8 million, to Brazil. This image shows us some of the routes and the pathways of where my ancestors were kidnapped from Africa and taken across the Atlantic Ocean and dropped in several places. One of the sayings is we crossed the water, which means they carried us across the water. Nearly half of the enslaved came from two regions, Senegambia, the area now comprising Senegal and Gambia, and West Central Africa, including what is now Angola, Congo, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Gabon. So water isn't just this calm place. It is holding trauma. It's a carrier of ancestral memory. So when Gullah Geechee people encounter water today, there is this complex juxtaposition that is happening of our ancestral ties and our historical roots, of which many of us have not gotten to see. So who were these Africans? Who were these people? Because a lot of times when people talk about Gullah Geechee, they just talk about enslaved, them being enslaved, but they were people. They were people with expertise. So as they came across, they were specifically chosen for their set of knowledge, what they knew. These folks were experts in the cultivation of rice, which was a labor-intensive task. So they were brought to the coast from Senegal, Gambia, and Angola because they were the ones who could engineer and work the systems to create the crops that would fund the development of the United States as we know it. And so in particular, the low country of South Carolina and Georgia was chosen because they already had a sophisticated knowledge of rice cultivation, and the marshlands and the waterways of coastal South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida closely mirrored the coastal lands of Africa. And if you look, they go right directly across from one another. So the landscape was the same, and they brought these people here, used them for their knowledge against their will. And this process for Gullah Geechee people became a really hard one, but it became a form of resilience and identity. So where's the place? The place has a name. It's called the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor. And it spans from North Carolina all the way down to Florida. So it's 4 states, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. Jacksonville, North Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida. It's from the Sea Islands of South Carolina and Georgia, 30 miles inland. And if you see up here, it's Berkeley County. That's where I'm from. So I'm from some of the more inland Gullah Geechee culture, but still very, very much Gullah Geechee. So Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor was created in 2006. Representative James Clyburn funded this corridor as a way to preserve Gullah Geechee land, property, culture, and history. So the corridor has been in place since 2006, and it is a way for Gullah Geechee people to continue to preserve what is our culture. So why does this matter? Deep cultural ties in Gullah are fishing and oystering and crabbing. And these aren't just economic activities, they are a continuation of ancestral skill and understanding. Our knowledge system was preserved in these coastal practices. Water, like I said before, is a witness to survival and resilience. And Gullah Geechee people have uniquely survived and have been resilient because they used what they knew from their lives in Africa and came and used it here, and we've been able to preserve it. So when we teach students about waterways, we can center the knowledge systems that sustain Gullah Geechee people. We're honoring their expertise that colonialism tried to erase. And I love that statement just because when people talk about Gullah Geechee, they always just really want to talk about it in terms of them being enslaved. But I want us to shift the narrative a little bit and honor their expertise, honor the fact that all these years later, after that horrible time in history, we are still hanging on to a lot of the practices that are authentic to Gullah Geechee. So in this photo, it was my pleasure to join the Hutchinson Heritage Foundation and Botany Bay Eco Tours, along with some prominent Gullah Geechee leaders in our Gullah Geechee Cultures Heritage Corridor, for an inaugural boat ride to uplift some little-known Gullah Geechee history on Edisto Island. So these participants were from distinguished organizations like the Edisto Island Open Trust, the Wigoja Foundation. I was there from the Okra Soup Foundation, the Guardian, International African American Museum, Gullah Geechee Chamber of Commerce. This was an unforgettable lesson on sailing the Ace Basin to trace the path of Jim Hutchinson and William Bailey. So research shows that Hutchinson and Bailey hailed down the USNS Kingfighter, providing critical intelligence of 9 Confederate spies holding out 162 years ago, which changed the course of the Civil War. So a special shout out to Captain Meg, who you see standing there at a store. She gave us unparalleled insight and historical knowledge of the extensive waterways surrounding Edisto Island. We are appreciative as well to Captain Dave of the Call Charters. He provided the vehicle that made this possible. And of course, y'all, when I was there on this trip, I got to snag some local shrimp and enjoy my ride home. But this particular trip, I wanted to highlight this one in particular because as we navigated the waterways, it was like riding on the highway, and it deepened my knowledge of how brilliant our ancestors were, that they used the waterways to navigate in and out of the spaces that they were in and eventually into freedom. There's a teaching opportunity here. So in classrooms, you could have students map out local waterways, research who lived and thrived there first, what knowledge was needed for them to live in this area, and what knowledge is still needed in order for those areas to be maintained. Growing up, we would always see certain people living in certain waterways and know that the fishing, making the cast nets, crabbing, going deep sea fishing, those were waterways that without someone being intentional about passing them down, we wouldn't know them today. So this was a wonderful experience for me and my colleagues. So now let's talk about resistance and liberation. So waterways were not just places of trauma, they became routes to freedom. Navigation through the marshlands, provides knowledge, survival knowledge, low country waterway routes to freedom, self-determination through water mastery. Marshlands around the low country offered hiding places. Tide knowledge and understanding when waters rise and fall, where currents move, became survival expertise. True story. My dad is a fisherman. So at night, he would come and he'd say, Jesse, go on and look at what a tide. And I said, oh, I used to hate that. But he needed to know what the tide was so he could know when he could go out, how far he could go out, so that he could make his catch and come on back home in order to feed the family and the community. And so he would go out and come back with a cooler full of 200 fish for us to eat. And it was a wonderful experience. And I didn't realize how much I learned through that experience of knowing the tides, but also learning on the boat ride that water was a pathway to freedom and it could hold all of these things at the same time. What I learned on the boat ride as well, we were on the Combahee River. The Combahee River Self-Defense Force, named after the river in South Carolina, launched one of the most successful slave rebellions in U.S. history. So they used water, landscape, and strategy. The leader was Harriet Tubman. She was the scout, spy, and commander. The force was 2nd South Carolina Volunteers, African American Unit, and the 3rd was Rhode Island Artillery. So the outcome, over 750 enslaved people were liberated from plantations along the river. So the water was a pathway to freedom, the same way it was a pathway into bondage. Her team, Harriet Tubman, led a group that used the same waters that put them into slavery to free over 700 enslaved people who were liberated along those plantations. And that is right there on Edisto Island and along the Gullah Geechee coast. These were Gullah Geechee people using water as a way to free themselves from enslavement. Their students need to know this. They need to see African and African diaspora people as agents of their own liberation, not passive victims. That's a fundamentally different educational stance. The narrative has been that we were enslaved and we were just so torn down. And while that may be a part, there was so much more to it. There was so much more to our survival, our liberation, and our resilience, as evidenced by what we get to own now. That is the Gullah Geechee culture we get to talk about today. The STEM connection to all of this ties to environmental literacy, understanding ecology, tides, hydrology. These weren't abstract for enslaved people. These were survival. They may not have had the terms that we use today, but these were the things that they used in order to survive. And so today's conversation about environmental justice, water rights, climate action, the eco history. They're inheriting both the knowledge and the ongoing work. They go together. But sometimes in the work, we miss the context of the people who did it without the tools, without the support, but they had the knowledge of the ecosystem in which they inherited. So what did they leave us with? Or what did they leave me with? And as we go through this presentation now, I gotta switch up and down and talk in Gullah like this just sometime. And then most of the time I can switch back and I'll speak like this. What did they leave us with? That's called code switching. So in Gullah Geechee culture, we do that pretty often because a lot of times we'll be speaking our Gullah language. Many people do not understand. But I love this phrase. What did they leave me with? Because although the narrative began with a cruel and horrible transatlantic slave trade, there are so many more years beyond that where we get to really love and enjoy the cultural aspects that we retain. Cultural ways, food ways, spiritual ways, and language ways. So here, I'll pause to see if there are any questions before we dive deeper into Gullah Geechee. And please feel free to place your questions in the chat as we go, as they come to you. I am able to see those, and so I'll take those questions as we go. Perfect. All right, so let's keep going. So what did they leave us with? They left us with Gullah Geechee. And I like to talk about Gullah Geechee in terms of 3 big bubbles: people, culture, and language. People, culture, and language. And one of the questions that I get really often as I talk about Gullah Geechee and Gullah Geechee culture is, what's the difference? Is there a difference between Gullah and Geechee? My answer is no. We are one people, one culture, one language. However, the origins of the name show us some differences, and there are some generational differences. So Gullah, they believe, originated from Gullah or Angola. There's a story of a man they call Gullah Jack. Gullah Jack was an enslaved African who ran away. And so on the flyers that were plastered around the Low Country area, they didn't know his name, so they called him Gullah Jack because he was from Angola. And all the people who were from that particular area in Africa, they refer to them in the same way. Geechee, they believe, is a derivative of the Geechee tribe in Africa, but also there is an Ogeechee River in Georgia. The generational differences between the two, I say that my grandmother spoke Gullah. She used a lot of African words in how she spoke, whereas I, growing up, would consider myself more Geechee because I use more traditional English vocabulary. So, for example, my granny would say something like, "Ani yeri wa I say," and I would say, "You ain't hear what I say," which means you didn't hear, or did you hear what I said? And so in those two examples, you hear how she's using Anna and Yeri, which are traditional Gullah words, and I am using Ewing here rather than Yeti, and then saying YC. Okay, and so that those are the differences, and you will also see Gullah in written different ways. Gullah Geechee with a slash, Gullah Geechee without a slash. There's some ongoing conversations about the difference, but I don't use the slash. I keep them both together, civilizing unity within our culture. So who are the people? I like to talk about the people first because one of the signature ways that you know somebody is Gullah Geechee is when you hear them talk. When you hear somebody talking like this right here and cracking their teeth like this, yeah, that's how you know Gullah Geechee. But there are people who don't speak this way. But that is one of the ways where we are always quickly identified by our native tongue. But when we talk about people, there are different ways that we describe certain people. Those of us who are native, Gullah Geechee, we are Banyas. So Banya. Non-natives, we call them Akamia. Those are people who just migrated here. And if you know anything about the Low Country area, it is one of the fastest growing areas in the country at this. And we refer to whites as Bakra. Now, some people say, well, that's derogatory. It's not, because Lorenzo Dow Turner in 1949 published a book called Africanisms in the Gullah Dialect. And in that text, he broke down and transcribed the first full phonetic transcription of the Gullah language. But he mapped certain words that the formerly enslaved, when he was on Wamala Island, would say, and he mapped them back to specific African languages, particularly Creole, Twa, Ibigbo, and Bibo languages. So, Mbakara is an Ibibo word in which they refer to whites in Africa. And so, Bakra is a derivative of that particular African word. So I'd like to start out with the people because these are the people who preserved. These are the people who persevered so that people like me have something to talk about, something to treasure, and something to hold on to. And so now we're going to jump into the different tides so that you can see all of the tides that interweave to make Gullah what Gullah is and why. So let's start with our spiritual tides. These are sacred water practices that continue to be used in Gullah. So first we have baptism. These traditions happen in the creeks, rivers, and they're central to many African diasporic communities. The ceremonies aren't just religious moments, they're moments of healing, renewal, spiritual sovereignty. After enslavement, water became a place where people could assert their own spirituality. And how did they do that? By pouring libation. Libation pouring is the ritual of pouring water or some other substance to honor the ancestors. Connects water to the sacred. It's an act of remembrance and an act of respect. So you'll see in this photo, my dear friend, Queen Quet, chiefess of the Gullah Geechee Nation, pouring libation during a libation ceremony. She has been a staunch advocate for Gullah Geechee culture and the first to speak at the United Nations and really lifting us up as Gullah Geechee culture. So I want to pause here for just 1 second in this sacred space and just let us observe as well the full immersion baptism in New Bern, North Carolina River at the turn of the 20th century. I love this image because imagine these people, ancestors of those who were newly free, now going into the water to practice sacred ceremony where they go under and they come up new. Just thinking about all that went under, who died, who didn't make it, and now the water being a place that is offering sovereignty and spiritual renewal. Another practice of our spiritual tide is the ring shout. It's a sacred circular dance with rhythms that are tied to tidal movements. It's cyclical, it's repetitive, it goes in counterclockwise motion. It's hypnotic and it's a full body expression of spirituality. And while everybody doesn't particularly participate in the ring shout, in this video that I'm going to show you, it's the Georgia ring shouters, but they sing with songs that also have a very tidal rhythm, synchronized body, spirit, water, reinforcing community in a very difficult circumstance and situation. So let's take a look at the ring shout. And as you can see, she was playing a washboard. That's another traditional Gullah Geechee instrument that we use. Now, that washboard is what they would actually use to wash clothes, but we were engineers. So then we took that washboard and we took a spoon and we used it, and that became our beat. You also saw him doing a double clap, that rhythm. That is called a polyrhythm, which is a rhythm that was retained from our African ancestors. True story. I live in Orangeburg, South Carolina, which is about 45 minutes outside of the Charleston area where I grew up. My husband is from here, and I went to church with him, and I began just doing that same clap like they do it in the video. And everyone looked at me just with a funny face, and I couldn't figure out why. Well, in Orangeburg, they don't do that clap. That is a very specific Gullah Geechee ancestral rhythm that we retained in the Gullah Geechee culture. And I'll talk a little bit about how we were able to retain this very soon. So as educators, we can respectfully explore these traditions, not by performing or entertaining, but learning about them, listening to recordings, reading poetries. What does water mean spiritually in different cultures? How do people honor their ancestors through ritual? This just may be a question that you can open up in spaces because everybody has experiences with water. And this is a question that can open up those conversations about how different people interact with water. We just need to be mindful that these particular practices of the ring shout that we see with Gullah are sacred practices. They center the voice of Gullah Geechee people themselves and, invite these folks into your classroom, share their oral histories in writing and in art. Now, one of the ways that we see this spiritual tide continuing to be practiced in the Gullah Geechee culture is in our churches. So when we have a church service, if somebody catches the Holy Spirit and they're dancing, the ushers will come and circle around them to make sure they're okay, but they do it in the ring shout motion. And so these ring shouters go around and they are just absolutely amazing. If you've never had a chance to see them, certainly encourage you to do that. So our livelihood as Gullah Geechee people is a water-based livelihood. A lot of our skills are based on the water because that's what we were around. Now, in particular, we were isolated on these plantations. And so we use what we had access to in order to create the life that we live today. So for centuries, Gullah Geechee communities have sustained themselves through water-based work like fishing, shrimping, and crabbing. This photo is Harry Murray. He pilots a bateau boat on Hilton Head Island, South Carolina. And this photo is from the National Museum of African American History. and culture. And a bateau boat is available for you to see at the International African American Museum, which is at Gadsden's Wharf in downtown Charleston, South Carolina. That's where about 40% of the enslaved came when they came into the United States, landed right there in Charleston at the site of the current International African American Museum. If you hadn't had a chance to visit, highly recommend that you come and see that sacred space. So this water as a livelihood, what we were able to sustain, it wasn't just our jobs. These are repositories of knowledge. Building boats by hand, making our nets by hand, reading the water and understanding the tide, understanding marine ecology, all developed through generations of practice. It's a way of knowing rooted in practice and experience. So we see casual crabbing with Tia. So Tia is a low country girl, and she offers crabbing experiences for people who want to do that. But this was something we did all the time. Me and my dad, Saturday morning, we would get up and we go in crabbing, shrimping. Out on St. Helena Island, they make their nets by hand. They go out and they shrimp. Fishing, like I said, my daddy's fisherman, and he would go out, catch about 200 whiting or spark-tail bass, and he would bring them thing home. We clean them out, put them in a Ziploc bag, fill that bag out with water, freeze them, get on the back of his boat, and drive down the road to make sure our entire community ate. So our livelihood was not just about ourselves. We were always facilitating community. So a teaching opportunity, invite a local fisherman or marine resource manager to your virtual classroom or your in-person classroom. They can share the knowledge, discuss how it's changing with climate, regulation, and market. Some of the questions you may ask: how do sustainable fishing practices work? What is the relationship between people and marine ecosystems? How do you design a boat that works in these waters? What materials work best? How do communities build livelihoods that are both profitable and sustainable? So some of our cultural ties, Gullah Geechee people, because of the isolation that we experienced on the plantations, we were able to retain a ton of African retentions. The first bridges were not built from Hilton Head Island until the 1920s. Dr. Emery Campbell talks a lot about that. We'll see a video of him a little bit later in the presentation. But because bridges weren't built, enslaved Africans just didn't have the ability to get up off those islands and go and mingle. So they were pretty isolated. The isolation also did something unique. There was malaria, yellow fever, all kinds of diseases. So the enslavers were not immune. And so they didn't spend a whole lot of time on those particular islands. But something they also did that I thought was interesting. They systematically separated the enslaved who came from the same villages and put them in specific places where they were not together with those who spoke the same language as them or came from the same tribe or had the same practices. And so now you have a group of people who are African, but if you know anything about Africa, very vast place, very different cultures, all kinds of different tribes and very different languages. So these folks had to come together and essentially recreate or create a whole new culture here in the United States. So what we see in Gullah Geechee are the retentions, the vestiges of the isolation where other Africans who may have gone on to be in other states, because they weren't isolated, they assimilated to the English culture, the culture that was around them, while Gullah Geechee people were able to essentially recreate Africa right here in the U.S. And I love it that somebody said one time, Gullah Geechee people are the closest you'll see to Africa or get to Africa here in the United States of America. So because they were isolated, they were able to preserve much of their traditional African practices. So I listed a few of these practices here on the screen. These cultural ties and vestiges of their African roots continue to distinguish Gullah Geechee people from African Americans across the U.S. First, and one that people see all the time, immediately recognize, our sweetgrass baskets. These baskets are handcrafted by Gullah Geechee artisans. They're retained across generations. They take a lot of time to make, and they have to go and harvest all of the materials in order to make those baskets. The bottle tree, blue bottle tree to catch spirits. That's folklore. And one of the things that we retain. Quote making, that is another practice that we retain. In the house on this picture has a hate blue roof. And hate blue is painted beneath because it is said to ward off, again, all of the spirits. Another African retention that is noted in Lorenzo Dow Turner's 1949 text is basket names, names that we get when we are born. And so, Verda Mae Smalls, Verda Mae, her basket name was Cutta, and Cutta is a turtle. And they call her Cutta because they said she looked like a turtle. I have one auntie, her basket name is Dada. And what we learned about the word Dada is Dada means sister. And so does Tutta. So Dada is auntie or sister, and then Tutta is sister. My granny was Tutta. So these cultural ties are vestiges, and they're rooted in what we do. Now let's talk about culinary ties. Food is culture made edible. Gullah Geechee cuisine tells a story of Africa, slavery, and survival. Let's start at the rice fields. So I told you earlier that they were brought over to the U.S. for their knowledge on cultivating rice through the rivers, marshes, and oceans. In these two pictures, you see rice trunks in Nemours Plantation on the Combahee River, courtesy of the Charleston County Public Library, and rice fields in the Ace Basin. This photo is from NOAA. And so I wanted you to see, because imagine this picture on the right. Imagine being enslaved and having to engineer this system in the low country waterways. These folks were brilliant. And being able to do this, to engineer this system, plant the rice, harvest the rice, and then turn around and use that same rice in order to create dishes that have been retained over centuries. It's something to celebrate. So these culinary ties have been passed down through generations, and I love Queen Quet's quote, "You must take care of the root, but heal the tree." This speaks to cultural preservation, to remembering, honoring where we came from. African roots, resilience of enslaved Africans, and cultural retentions. So you'll see blue crabs, one of our absolute favorites. Okra soup, one of my favorites. It has okra, corn, tomato, shrimp, some neck bone, and sometimes somebody might put some little baby lima beans in there. Tomato paste, tomato sauce, and tomatoes. Cook that up, let them come to a boil, season them up good, put it in the refrigerator because they don't eat good the first day. Once it done set in, it eats good. Oysters, another delicacy for us, but we only eat those in the months that end in R. Because my mama said, it's probably not true, but again, it's a story worth telling. If the water too warm, it's bacteria, and you need to cook them oysters. So we always steam our oysters when we eat them. If that resonates with you, let me know. But what I love about our cultural ties is our African roots, our resilience of enslaved Africans, and how they were able to, even though they were in the worst of worst situations, retain their African traditions and pass them down. Again, the crabs. And on the right, I wanted to put this picture here of red rice. So red rice is just like jollof rice, which is made in Africa, in particular Nigeria, Gambia. They make a jollof rice. And so red rice is the Gullah Geechee version of that. And I love that we can see the parallels still happening between our sweetgrass baskets and our culinary ties. So two words that we say, Nam means to eat, and Pon means on. So we got Nam, Pon, Nasupia, and this is some of our food ways. I love how our culinary traditions also blend into what become cultural practices. So in the Gullah Geechee culture, we have a crab crack. This is, you boil your crab, or you do a frog more stew with your egg and your corn and all of that in one pot. And they throw them on the table. And as you can see, that table goes all the way down and everybody just is at the table eating. That is a cultural practice I haven't seen anywhere. But in the Gullah Geechee culture, it is really about family. We do this with our family. And as you can see that picture on the right, that's me and my cousin that I hadn't seen in a very long time. But we bonded over the crabs and we had such a good time. So in your classroom, you can share a recipe, cook it together, talk about the history of the ingredients. Where does it come from? What does it represent? Food is an amazing gateway to culture that feels safe and joyful for students. I talked about the isolation, and I'll mention the isolation once more because the isolation was incubation. Uh, the enslaved being on those islands was an incubator for them to recreate Africa. And that's really important to know. This is Dr. Emery Campbell, whom I'd like you to hear from. He is one of the founders of the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor. He was the first, one of the first executive directors of the Penn Center on St. Helena Island, which is the first school for those who were freed after the emancipation. So he took a trip to Sierra Leone, Africa, and he's going to tell us a little bit about that experience.
I tell you, I felt pretty much at home in Sierra Leone. It really did feel like a dream because there was always a wonderment on where did our speech, why did we sound different? You know, why did we eat a lot of rice? People call us rice-eating Geechees. If we don't eat rice, we haven't eaten, you know. It's just like, and I never given it a thought as to something different from other people. But as soon as you hit the mainland, they'd call you a rice-eating Geechee. You know? Oh, you want rice? And we never knew where all that came from. But the speech, for example, you know, the Huna, and meaning you, and we saw signs all over. We glad for Siuna, and that was my grandmother's real. That was her phrase always, you know, when strangers came. Oh, we glad for Siuna. We glad Huna come for Siwi. And so and it was just always a mystery as to why we were quote unquote different from other people. And so instead of still perceiving myself as being a backward person, that trip to Sierra Leone reinforced the fact that what we had been practicing actually were Africanisms all the time.
I love that. He said, what we've been practicing were Africanisms all the time. And I love that particular phrase because growing up and being a Gullah Geechee speaker, sometimes we would be ridiculed or people would think that we weren't smart because of how we spoke. And so his realization when he went to Sierra Leone and he saw the signs and he felt welcome, he heard them say, I'm glad for Sienna, which we say all the time. They're speaking that and saying that in Sierra Leone in the Creole language that's spoken there is reaffirming that Gullah Geechee, in fact, is a living language. It's linked to African linguistic roots, blended with English, and adopted and adapted and created here in the Low Country. So Gullah Geechee originated as a pidgin variety. It was the Africans who spoke various languages like Yoruba, Mende, Hintu, Igbo, Creole, and various others, blended with English because they had to try and learn English in order to do what you see in these photos is take care of the children of those who own them. So rather than passing down their native tongue, they passed down this blended variety, which created a pidgin. That pidgin was then passed down to their children. So now their children don't know the original African language. They know this English blend. When that happens, it's called the Creole process. So Gullah Geechee is the only English-based Creole language living in the United States. We know other Creole languages like Jamaican, a Creole, the Creole down in Louisiana, French Creole. Shout out to LSU because that's where I graduated from and had a blast out there with the Creole folks. But Gullah is unique because it is English based and it is the only one living here in the US. So a couple words I want to go over and introduce you to just some of the language of Gullah that came out of that horrible situation, but is why we get to be bilingual people today because we say crack teeth, which means to smile or talk. Yeri, which means to hear. Unravelly mouth. Now that really means somebody talking just entirely too much. Now, when we refer to people, I talked about some of these earlier. A bunya is somebody who's been here or a Gullah Geechee descendant. A kamya, somebody who just come here. They're not originally from the corridor, but has made this place home. Churn and chillin are children. Ana or una, which you'll see spelled O-O-N-A, is you, which like anabanya, gal, or woman for girl for woman. So gal for girl and woman for woman. And you will typically hear more gal for all women or girls. Some things, fish is for fish. So we typically will substitute that short I sound in most of our words. So it would never be a bill, it's a bull, right? Turtle is a cutter. And then we do not have the SH, ST blends. So shrimp is scrump, scrawl, and screep. Now, I'm a speech language pathologist, and I've had teachers to refer kids for special services because they said scrimp, scrape, and scrawl. And I tell them, absolutely not. That is a function of their native variety and not an indication of any type of articulation or language disorder. Vegetable for vegetable, and frigidity. Our tense in agreement is different, so we do not mark past tense. Past tense does not have to be marked. So in English, where you would say she walked home yesterday, we would say he walked home yesterday. Our present progressive does not also have to be marked. So he is walking fast across the street, he'd walk fast across the road. Plurals do not have to be marked. We know that by the number. So instead of saying, I want 3 donuts in Gullah, we say, I want 3 donuts. And you know it's more than one because I didn't tell you how much I want. And possessives. That's my mother's car. We ain't got to say all that. That's my mama car because you know that's my mama car. So we do not mark our possessives. And all of these structures in terms of tense and agreement align with the African varieties in which they come from. And so Lorenzo Dow Turner work gives us that framework. Some common phrases that we hear as well in modern Gullah culture are bussin'. Some of y'all probably have heard that phrase. Unit, like Idris Elba fine, unit, like right. So it's a tag onto the end of a statement. Hooray is like, whoa. Yeti is to hear. Directly is like in a minute. So teachers may hear in the classroom, Johnny, I need you to do X and X, Y, Z. And Johnny would say, I can do them directly, meaning I'm going to do it in a minute. And mine, and it doesn't mean that's mine. It means mine yourself. Like, you better be careful. So also very interesting in Gullah, sometimes you'll see words that look familiar or look like a traditional English word, but we do not use it in that particular context. Something else you probably already heard me say is E. So our pronomial system is different as well. We do not have to distinguish between gender. So he, she, it, they, and them are all E. So where's Johnny? E right there. Where is my mouse? E right here. Like where are those churn? E gone. And so E is our universal pronoun, and we see that pronoun happening in many different Creole varieties. Look ya means look here. Sick, sick means somebody got sick. The hag, now that's a story because the hag will ride you when you sleep and you can't move. And so there's some people who done ride by the hag and some people who don't. Now some people will try to explain it away as sleep apnea. But those of us in the Gullah Geechee culture, we know the difference between the sleep apnea and the hag. Along those lines, some other cultural practices and retentions from Africa include root work, which is witchcraft, if you will, but using medicinal herbs to cure, to heal, and in some instances, place bad juju, if you will, on certain folks. So language is not just communication, it's identity. So when a student hears their grandmother words validated in the classroom, it tells them that their culture has value. Gullah Geechee language has been stigmatized as bad English by mainstream education. So our job is to kind of reframe it as a remarkable linguistic system, proof of cultural retention and adaptation. I'm gonna say that again. Proof is a valuable and remarkable linguistic system that is proof of cultural retention and adaptation. Love, love, love that phrase because it reframes what Gullah actually is. So I would encourage you to invite storytellers, elders, and ask, what story does language tell? Language study becomes cultural archaeology. And it's important to note that language preservation, particularly for young people, is urgent. A lot of kids are not growing up speaking Gullah Geechee anymore. So valuing it in education as we participate, keep it 100% alive. So I want you to think about this, and we're not going to have a whole lot of time to do this. I'm going to keep going for time's sake. But you're a fisherman headed out to the water. Tell the story of your journey. I want you to use at least 3 or 1 or 2 Gullah Geechee words that you've learned. Or in this case, just drop in the chat the favorite Gullah Geechee word that you heard or saw in this presentation so far. We'll take an intentional pause here. Here are some of those words. Lukya, Tiksik, Nahag, Root. Drop your favorite in the chat. Basin, Emmett, Kured, Yeti, directly, mine. Some of our tense and aspect pieces there. And the people, Benya, Tamya, Scrum. Oh yeah, lack of binary pronouns. That's my favorite. I absolutely love that. Thank you, Melinda. Anyone else? I'm still checking. Awesome. So here are just a few culture keepers that you should know. KJ Kearney is the founder of Black Food Friday. He really amplifies the Gullah Geechee culture and language in a beautiful way and ties it to the food pathways. Ron Days, he was on Gullah Gullah Island. He got the hag. Thank you, Scott. I see that. Ron Days, Gullah Gullah Island. And I've already introduced you guys to Queen Quet, chiefess of the Gullah Geechee Nation. We have Chef DJ Dennis preserving a lot of our foodways, and storyteller Aunt Pearlie Sue, who was a former educator and really used the art of Gullah storytelling to preserve a lot of our culture. So I love this portion because we just get to talk through some implementation strategies. And we are not going to get to go through all of these today, but I'll introduce them to you and hopefully you can use them in practice at some point. But here they are. The Build a Boat Challenge. So you can challenge folks to use recycled materials and incorporate a story about traveling the marshes, water, and connect this to STEM and cultural heritage. Create a mini lesson with this. And this could be a take-home challenge. They need to list the items from home that they use: paper, plate, popsicle sticks, plastic bottles, clothing scraps. The goal is functional creativity. And the instruction as well includes a story. Like, okay, what is your favorite body of water? You have them identified first. And then, okay, now build a boat that could navigate those waters that your ancestors knew. Where does the boat sail? Does it hold people? What does it carry? What is the story around that boat? And then have them take pictures, document, and post short videos of their boats. You could even line those boats up and do a virtual gallery so everyone gets to experience it. It's a hands-on learning opportunity that preserves storytelling. You still get your waterways, you get STEM, and it elevates it beyond just a basic crafting cultural expression, but sharing their work and their ingenuity and tying it into the waterways and coastal ways that they get to navigate in their day-to-day work and expression. The oyster shell mosaic. Why this is something that I think is gorgeous. I absolutely love oysters, and you can do this with just a sheet of paper with an oyster and have them color it for younger kids. But art is a universal language. It transcends all the things, creating something beautiful, honoring, and it shares a piece of Gullah Geechee culture is the oyster that we talked about. So you can give them the prompt, create a digital mosaic or create a mosaic, connecting it to water and culture. What colors are you picking? Why are you choosing those cultures? What does each of them mean? And they can take pictures with that and also create a virtual gallery. I wanted to highlight something about the oyster shells. So this tabby is known as coastal concrete, is made from a mixture of lime, sand, water, and oyster shells. The origin is unknown, but what we see across particularly Beaufort County has the largest tabby ruins that still exist in the U.S. And so what we know is that enslaved, because they were there and they were the laborers, the availability of slaves and the availability of shells made it really a popular choice in the Low Country to build buildings. And this was time consuming, very, very intensive work that was grueling. And so if you visit the International African American Museum at any point, underneath the museum is lifted up off the ground. So you walk up underneath it, and the columns that hold it up are all made of tabby to honor the ingenuity of our ancestors in using that material to create sustaining structure that still exists today. And then the story guide framework, because in our culture, telling stories is how we share, how we pass down recipes, how we pass down. But I love this story guide framework. It's a 3-wave journey. So wave 1 is the beginning. Where are you? Who are you with? What are you doing? Wave number 2, we're turning the tide. Something happens. What challenge, surprise, or lesson appears? And then wave 3, the return. What'd you learn? How do you feel? And what do you remember? And this framework ties in the waterways and gives them an opportunity to tie it back into tides and waves, but also brings it back around to a story. So let's land on what you can take back to your classroom, your lab, your program, or just back to your community. Water is a lens, and I had so much fun pulling this together and presenting Gullah Geechee through the lens of water and why water is so sacred and it continues to be a landing place for us. It opens doors to history. We learn so much about how Gullah Geechee people came here by water. We have used water to honor our ancestors. We use water to be sustainable. Water continues to be culture, spirituality, and science and identity all at once. It's a through line that connects all of the things to us and within the curriculum. STEM and humanities. You don't have to choose between cultural education and science. They're pretty much inseparable. Some of the best learning happens when we weave them together, when we talk about the ingenuity of the Gullah Geechee people to make their own shrimping nets, to make their own bateau boats, to navigate the coastal waters, to engineer the systems that cultivated rice across the United States, to maintain and cook the recipes that we've been able to still retain today. That is cultural education and science, and they all go together. Student ownership. When students see themselves in the curriculum, their culture, their water, their stories, they become agents of knowledge, not passive consumers. It took me way too long to figure this out. It wasn't until I attended Winthrop University and I had to do a study in history class, and somehow I decided to write a paper on rice. I'm not even sure why to this day. I wrote a paper on rice. But as I read the books and learned about the cultivation of rice, I thought, why didn't anybody tell me that my ancestors were so smart and so strong and so creative under the absolute worst circumstances? Why did it take me to college to learn this? So I implore you, if you're working with kids who are younger, tell them, teach them, have them have conversations about the language. I have one question in chat. What is the age range of students that you teach? It runs the gamut. So professionally as an SLP, I work with early intervention, so birth to 3. My actual teaching is college level, so undergraduate and graduate. And my community work with the Okra Suit Foundation is middle and high school. So I teach in all kinds of spaces and try to use these tools to adapt to the audience and help kids see themselves as owners of the culture. Number 4, Gullah Geechee culture is thriving. The Gullah Geechee people are thriving. We're embracing our heritage through daily acts of preservation. When my mom was growing up, my granddad and everybody, being Gullah was not it. Like saying you were Gullah Geechee, you just couldn't say that. That was derogatory. Well, now I'm proud to be Gullah Geechee. We are Gullah Geechee down to the socks. We are not afraid. And because of that, I've seen people who wouldn't normally say they're Gullah Geechee now say that they are. And I'm really, really proud of that because the stigma around being Gullah Geechee is slowly moving away and is being celebrated as something that others can learn from. And I think it's important that they do. So our closing circle. What's one thing from today that you will carry forward? And what's one thing you heard today that shifts how you think about water, culture, or teaching? You can drop that in the chat, please. What's one thing from today that you will carry forward? What's one thing you heard today that shifts how you think about water, culture, and teaching? Don't be shy.
I I can't resist, but I also can't type into the Q&A, so I'm going to jump in.
Okay,
Sorry,
jump
John.
in, jump in.
A desire to learn more is what I'm carrying forward from this, because there's just so many cool aspects of it and so many cool ties. And I know I told you before this started that that my parents lived down in that zone for
Mhm.
most of the year, much of the year, and so just a desire to learn more and be down there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad. I love the fact that it sparked interest to continue to learn more. And as you can see, I mean, in this short time frame, no way I could pack it all in there, but definitely hope that I could give you some depth and breadth and a little more nuance to what you'll see. Lynette says, I love the term Africanism. Me too. Me too. One of my favorite. Somebody said, I had no idea the blue port ceiling and bottle trees I grew up with our Gullah Geechee. Absolutely. Yes. Pre-colonial ways of understanding coastal ecology. Absolutely. Thank you for carrying this beautiful culture forward and sharing with everyone. Celebrated. There's always so much for us to learn. I'll carry that forward. Water's life and the spirituality is absolutely 100% connected to it. So the tides come in and out, they come and go. Knowledge flows like water, bringing all of these traditions into your teaching, into your community, into your language. You're a part of the larger tide of resistance, remembrance, and resilience. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you for showing up. And in the way we say it in Gullah Geechee, we say it like this. Thank you, thank you for showing up today. Meaning, thank you for showing up. If you'd like to follow me, learn more, my website's there, drjessicaberry.com. That's my email. The QR code that's on the screen will lead you to my link tree. And on my link tree, you'll be able to follow along on where I am on socials at the Geechee Scholar, Hey Jessica Berry, and on YouTube, have a little show called Gullah Talk, which hopefully I'll kick back off this summer. And then my book, the Little Gullah Geechee book, A Guide for the Kamya, is available on Amazon. So thank you all so kindly for your time, your attention, and your questions. I will turn the floor back over to the wonderful leaders who invited me to the stage.
Thank you, Dr. Jessica Berry, for an incredible webinar with so many ideas and such a comprehensive, broad overview of the culture and opportunities to engage with that, with our Marine Labs and education. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Brett Burke from Burke and Associates, for the webinar tech support. We will have this, I believe, available on our NAML website as a recording. And again, thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, everybody. I'm stalling just a little bit because I see Dr. Barry's reading the comments that are coming streaming in. I don't want to cut those off for you. We'll give you
Yeah,
another
just
minute
real
here, and
quick,
then
I
we'll.
see, absolutely. I see Melinda had a question about uh, writing an oceanography textbook delivered through the lens of a variety of cultures. That's excellent. How would you recommend integrated culture in teaching when the cultures are not your own? That's a great question. And we never want to pretend or appropriate, particularly if we're not a part of the culture. So I would say start building relationships with folks in the communities that you aspire to be included in those books or in the book, and see if they would partner with you to either contribute to chapters or to write those chapters for you. And I think you lend your expertise. I'm not sure what your background is, but it sounds like from what you wrote that you're the educator and you would kind of be writing this textbook. So perhaps you blend what you know about education with their cultural knowledge and create a very useful tool, right, for for moving forward. So I'm an oceanography professor. Oh, love that, love that. So yeah, I would definitely say start with finding folks in those communities and trying to develop partnerships with them so that they could contribute to each of the chapters. That's really important. I know particularly in Gullah culture, a lot of the concern has been that people kind of come in and they want to write about us, but they don't include us. So including the voice of the people is really, really important. Yes, please come knocking. I'll be happy to hear from you and so work with you on that project.
Dr. Berry, I did have one last question. Is that
Yeah.
what gives you the most excitement or hope as you think about the future of your work?
Oh, the next generation.
Hmm.
I'm excited that they don't have to live with the stigma that my parents and grandparents lived with, and they don't have to live in this unsettled kind of confused space of my generation. They really get to live in a digital age where Gullah's being taught at Harvard. You got social media accounts that talk about Gullah. It's featured on Hulu and Netflix and all of these places. People are writing in the language on Facebook and TikTok and YouTube and all the things, videos popping up everywhere. So now their level of pride in the culture is starting sooner. And so it makes me excited because when I see that, I know that it won't die as people have believed that as they believe that it has or will. But I see a generation that's urgently fighting for preservation, and that excites me. Just this week, there was a group that put out a call for the largest plantations in the Charleston area, reparations to give them over 100 acres on those properties. And they've got so much support in order to create sustainable agricultural practices that support the Gullah community, to create educational spaces that support the Gullah community. So they wouldn't be able to do that when my mom was growing up or when I was coming up. But this resurgence of pride, I'm really excited about what they're going to be able to do with that. That's a great
Wow.
question. Thank you.
That's
That's
got to be
great.
so validating. That's,
It is.
yeah. Wow. Thank you.
It is. It is. Awesome. Says, thank you for teaching me about cultural retention. I never knew that there. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I love it. And I love the word vestiges is one of my favorite words as well. Vestiges of the culture. We get to see droppings of it all around, vestiges of Africa everywhere. And so I love when somebody shows me something that I'm like, oh, that's a vestige of Africa. We've kept Africa alive, even though they took us away from our land. So again, thank you guys. Great questions. And I hope to
Thank
connect with
you.
some of you in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye. Nice to meet you.
Bye. Nice to meet you as well.